You want USC football coverage? We've got USC football coverage. Alicia Day Artola joining us from Reign of Troy to break down the Trojans and some happy good news for the first time in the offseason. And it is just not slightly positive. It is huge. We appreciate you jumping on board, Alicia, to break things down for us.
Yeah, it's nice to finally have something good to talk about with USC. It feels like it's been a while.
Bad season, bad offseason, disappointing recruiting cycle. Then, bam, okay, Brew McCoy. We'll see about him, but the signs are positive since he has gone to USC, now Texas, and back possibly to Southern California. But we'll deal with the certainty of Chris Steele first.
Yeah, this was the biggest of the two, actually. Chris Steele is a bigger deal for USC because Chris Steele can actually have an immediate impact at a position that USC has been desperate for somebody to have an immediate impact in. USC had him as a commit last summer. The season hadn't really gone the way that USC wanted, and he was one of the casualties of that. He ultimately decommitted and signed with Florida. And when he decided to leave Florida for personal reasons, USC fans definitely perked up and were like, "Ooh, this could get interesting." But it never really felt like USC was in the cards there, and he committed to Oregon pretty quickly. And so it was just kind of one of those things that you said, "Yep, this is what happens when you go 5-7. This is what happens when you can't guarantee a player that you will put him in the NFL." And then lo and behold, a couple weeks later, all of a sudden things just fell into place. And he spoke. He came out yesterday on Wednesday and was talking about his reasons for ultimately switching his commitment from Oregon to USC. It has to do with some family things. He's from Southern California. He wants to stay closer to his family, who is going through some financial hardship apparently right now. And so USC gets him, and it's a huge deal for USC because he will probably be given a waiver from the NCAA to play as a freshman, and despite his transfer. And USC is replacing every starter in the secondary this coming season, and particularly at cornerback, they have some talent there, but it's all unproven. And it was going to be a Elijah Griffin and Isaac Taylor Stewart are starters and good or bust. Like anything short of those two guys coming through, USC was going to be in trouble. When you bring in Chris Steele, who is a guy who can compete for a starting job as a true freshman, not only do you have a potential starter that you're bringing in, even if he's not a starter, he's competition. He's somebody who in practice will drive the other players to potentially get better, who will drive himself to get better. So it's really a win-win for USC as far as the biggest position of need on the roster, getting one of the top recruits in California. Not only does it make the recruiting class look a whole lot better, but it makes your secondary look a whole lot more stable by bringing him in.
So somebody else's misstep, that meaning not necessarily specifically Dan Mullen, but he's responsible, of course, causing the situation at the University of Florida. And Chris Steele there again, it appeared as though he was headed to Oregon, which the momentum is such a big part of recruiting and the perception of which programs on the rise, which ones are falling. And certainly that's been the narrative for both Oregon and USC. Flip the coin. So Chris Steele going to Oregon was not a big surprise in regards to just that being the feel for that's where the chic most recent spot in the Pac-12 would be. But USC gets Chris Steele to come back home. Brew McCoy, it appears, is headed in the same direction. Number one athlete, according to 247 Sports Composite, number two player in California. Brew McCoy, of course, had headed to Texas. And as you had mentioned, feeling a bit homesick. That seems to be the story.
Yeah, and that's why it's not official that he's going to be going to USC, but because he didn't mention USC in his statement that he put out when he announced his transfer from Texas, but he did say, "I'm going back home," and there has been no chatter about UCLA. So you sort of have to say, yeah, it's definitely going to be USC. It's just waiting on official word. And it's another huge pickup for USC, another recruitment that they'd kind of botched, not just in the sense of the way that he enrolled at USC and then transferred after 2 weeks and all that kind of stuff, but the fact that it even in the early signing period that USC was in such a tight battle with Texas in the first place. Brew McCoy should have been a dyed-in-the-wool Cardinal and gold Trojan from day one. There shouldn't have been any question about where he was going to end up. And the fact that they had to battle Texas in the first place was a red flag. That he ultimately jumped ship because of the Cliff Kingsbury stuff, huge red flag. You cannot whitewash how bad of a moment that was for USC. What's turned around is that USC made the right hire for the offensive coordinator in Graham Harrell, and that USC had a pretty solid positive spring. And Brew McCoy got to Austin, realized that, it's not Southern California. He's not around his family, all of those kinds of things. And again, the door opened for USC to right a wrong, more or less, the wrong that they themselves had done by not securing that enrollment in the first place. But he will probably have to sit out because the NCAA doesn't generally grant hardship waivers for homesickness. But either way, like you said, he's the number one athlete in the class, a top tier wide receiver, a top tier linebacker in high school, and he will strengthen USC whenever he becomes eligible, particularly if he does end up at wide receiver, where USC is about to lose Michael Pittman to graduation after this season. Tyler Vaughns will be eligible to go to the NFL after this season. So in 2020, USC is going to need the reinforcements in the receiving corps, and Brew McCoy will be someone that you pencil in as a day one starter after taking his redshirt season.
Got Alicia De Artola on the line. We encourage you to stop over on Reign of Troy to check out her work in covering USC football. Always does an outstanding job for us. And so we've got recruit number 3, commitment from Jack Yerry. You've got to be maybe up in years like myself to remember his father playing for the Minnesota Vikings with 4 Super Bowl appearances, Pro Football Hall of Famer Jack Yerry, not of the ilk of a Steele or a Brew McCoy when it comes to recruiting rankings, but still a top 20 tight end in the nation. And it's always nice to keep one of your own at home.
Absolutely. He's a Trojan legacy. And in some sense, that's really important for USC at this stage. If you can't convince the son of Ron Yerry to attend USC, then there is really something wrong with the program. It's a USC family, and he's a 3-star tight end. He's an intriguing athlete. He wants to play tight end. There is obviously he has the body to potentially be tried at offensive tackle at some point. He obviously has the pedigree with his family, with his father in that position. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops as a player, but he's a guy that USC can bring in, feel good about bringing him in because they keep that legacy intact. And also they need tight ends. Graham Harrell's air raid does utilize the tight end. USC is thin at that position and does have a couple guys who will be graduating in a couple of years. So they're going to want to reinforce that spot. And I think Jack Yerry is a very good start there. So it's definitely another little positive nugget that you can throw in there as far as the general momentum of positivity that is flowing through USC right now.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down USC. We've got Alicia De Artola on the line from Reign of Troy. Always does an outstanding job getting us set for 2019 most recently. And we would like to remind you, you can help us build the channel by grabbing the Amazon link in the description section below. Doesn't cost you an extra penny. Don't have to buy the product. Just grab that link to do your Amazon shopping. Also, join us at the college football, voice of college football community over on Patreon, where we deliver 2 exclusive live streams involving you. So we bring you on to talk to the voice of college football and also my direct response to your viewer comments. To date this year, we're over 36,000 comments compared to 6,000 at this point last year. So thank you for the response. All right, let's start breaking down some position units. We'll go to the offensive line that's been much maligned in recent years. Missing 3 starters from 2018, including Toa Lobodon, who has moved on as a free agent. He's in Jets camp. So your thoughts about the prospects in replacing those 3 and moving forward?
Yeah, USC's offensive line is obviously in transition, but they performed so poorly last season in general that there is a little bit of positivity about where this group could be going, even though they are replacing the 3 starters. Toa Lobodon was a veteran, but he had a difficult senior season. And so there is a lot of hope that his replacement, Brett Nealon, who was the number 2 center coming out of high school when he was a recruit. It was a really intriguing prospect in the sense that he seems to have the right mentality. He is a reasonable leader, seems to understand what he needs to do as far as commanding the offensive line from the center position. And he's got a mean streak that you got to like, and he fits into that offensive line quite well. Chris Brown is being replaced by Elijah Vera Tucker, who was a rotational guy last season, filling in for Andrew Voorhees at times at right guard. Elijah Vera Tucker, I have argued, should have been USC's starting right guard last season. And I am quite excited to see him at left guard now, getting his chance to shine, be in there game in and game out and do his thing. I think he has a more solid base than Andrew Voorhees was able to show last year. So I think potentially there's an upgrade there as far as if he reaches his potential. The big question is at right tackle, where USC is replacing Chuma Edoga. During spring camp, they had Jalen McKenzie filling in there, and he looked pretty solid. He had played the final 2 games of the season in 2018 because Chuma Edoga was dealing with some injuries. So he's had some game experience, but USC landed Tennessee transfer Drew Richmond this spring, and he's going to be enrolling in the fall. And he's a graduate transfer. He was a pretty highly touted player. He was a starter at Tennessee. And you got to imagine he's coming to USC to start. Like, I don't think this is a guy who comes to USC thinking he's going to be sitting on the bench. So it will be a really intriguing fall camp battle between him and McKenzie, because I think both of them will be looking at it and saying, I deserve to start, especially because Jalen McKenzie was increasingly becoming one of the leaders on the offensive line in spring camp. So that'll be the big thing to watch. One of those 2 guys is going to be the starter at right tackle. And again, it's not like this offensive line has anywhere but up to go. They have a new offensive line coach in Tim Drevno. They have a new offensive system, which has very much streamlined and simplified what it is that they're being asked to do. And so the hope around USC is that keeping it simple will ultimately yield much better results than they were able to show last year.
So with all these conversations I have day to day, I forget that, Edoga, the better of the 2 prospects going to the New York Jets, he was actually drafted number 92, a top 3 selection in the NFL draft. And then also, Drew Richmond. I've talked to some Tennessee folks down through the years about him. And most recently, since he transferred out of the program, he was actually a 5-star who was not supposed to start his first year, was pressed into duty. And there were several issues with the offense. And obviously, Tennessee has had its issues overall that could have related to his disappointing play. But he had a promising first year there at Tennessee, and then got bumped and bruised a little bit, and also consistently started, but wasn't the force that they expected him to be. But 5-star talent could really be coached up and maybe given a new lease on life there across the country. So the 107th rushing attack out of 130 teams in FBS football, that much a reflection on the offensive line, but also the running backs as well. Cedric Ware, as you mentioned, 6.5 yards per carry. So he was highly productive in the number of carries he had, led the team in rushing. Let's talk running backs. And of course, Stephen Carr would be the first person that would come to mind for most of us.
Yeah, and he is the guy that really has to put up or shut up this year. He came in as a freshman and was very exciting. Ultimately, his freshman season was derailed by injury, and he came into the 2018 season, and it never looked like it was going to be what USC needed it to be, because he ended up having back surgery in the spring. When you're coming off of a back surgery, no player I've ever seen coming off of back surgery has ever been even close to what they were when they were at their peak. It usually takes the second year that you get really back to full speed. So that's what USC is banking on when it comes to Stephen Carr this coming season. Is he's now a full year removed from that back surgery. He is as healthy as he's been as a Trojan, and USC is going to be running an offense that maybe they're not going to be pounding the ball the way that USC fans have been accustomed to in the student body left, student body right kind of mentality. But the air raid will make use of their running backs, and Stephen Carr is more or less built with the skill set that should thrive in the air raid. He is an exceptional pass catcher out of the backfield, and USC is going to get the ball in his hand wherever they can be. And one thing that USC has very much insisted throughout the spring as they're introducing this new Graham Harrell offense is they will not abandon the running game. They were insistent on a 50-50 split last season and seasons before as far as the balance of their offense. That's going to change, but it's not going to be much less than a 60-40 kind of situation, and the running backs are still going to get touches in the receiving game. So Stephen Carr is a guy who really could have a breakout season, but he's got to prove that he can sustain it, that he can stay healthy. He has an exceptional skill set. There's a reason he was a 5-star running back coming out of high school. He is, quick. He has good vision. He can make, great cuts and weave his way through a defense, but he needs to get that step back that he had before the back injury and some nagging ankle stuff and everything that's pretty much kept him from being a really, exceptional heir apparent to Ronald Jones II, like people might have hoped. Personally, I am a big advocate of Vivai Malapai. So I got to mention him because he's the backup from last year. Didn't get a lot of opportunities, but when he did, he showed incredible grit and want to, and he was very difficult to take down. He's got a sort of kind of broad, kind of squat body that allows him to get low and shrug off contact. So I'm very, very excited about him. He can also catch the ball out of the backfield. So between the two of them, Stephen Carr and Vivai Malapai, plus hopefully some improvement in the offensive line, I think USC's running game will have an extreme improvement from where they were, which might be surprising considering that USC is going to the air raid. But I think that will ultimately yield significantly better numbers on the ground because last year was just so very subpar.
Yeah, they basically split carries. They both had nice games against Washington State. Carr with a nice game against Stanford, 10 carries for 52 yards. And down the stretch, it was Malapai with a few more rushing attempts and a good game against UCLA to finish off the year well before the Notre Dame effort. So the running game doesn't have a proven commodity back there, but guys that have game experience in the top two backs there. And like you say, the offensive line, a big reflection on the 107th ranking rushing, which I'm sure the current coaching staff and approach isn't going to be so concerned about the total numbers in the rushing game. It's the effectiveness. And they seem to have a good complement between the top two in regards to what you're explaining about power versus cut and speed downfield.
Yeah. Malapai is probably, I would call him more all around. Not necessarily a power back, not necessarily a speed back, but one of those guys that maybe does a little bit of everything. Carr definitely has the home run ability, and I think they can complement each other, especially because USC is going to go to the two back sets that we've seen sparingly over the last couple of years. But in Graham Harrell's offense, that seems like it might be something that USC throws out there a little bit more often, where they have both of them in the backfield. And Malapai can get out there and block reasonably well. Carr less so, but the two of them, I think, can absolutely thrive in the same offense. And USC fans are excited also for the third option, Marquise Stepp, who is the true power back that maybe you'll see a lot around the goal line. But figuring out USC's rotation is going to be very, very intriguing because there's a new running backs coach, Mike Jinks. He is an unknown commodity as far as how he's going to juggle the athletes that he now has available to him. In the past, he's preferred a single sort of bell cow back, and we will see if that's what he goes with. And if he goes with that, then you can pencil in Carr there. But I think a rotation makes more sense given who USC has available to them and the philosophy of Clay Helton in particular when it comes to running backs.
And speaking toward the potential, as you mentioned, in the air raid attack, Malapai with 15 receptions last year, Carr with 8. Those numbers could go up, but obviously that's going to be a skill set that they're going to need to improve on. Keenan Christon was the only signed running back in the 2019 class. I don't want to call him a marginal prospect. 3-star, top 30 running back in the nation. So probably nothing coming in the 2019 class, but they're going to have to go with what they've got. And again, it was a lowly rated rushing attack that they're not probably too concerned with the rushing rank for this year, but the productivity in spots that they're going to need for this offense to thrive. Alicia De Artola from A Reign of Troy breaking down USC for us. Please join her in, for one thing, the article that I was just referencing, breaking down the offensive line that she posted a couple months ago. So look through that and everything else that she and the rest of the staff have in store there at Reign of Troy. Alicia, we appreciate you stopping by as always.
Always fun. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Alicia, thank you.